is Hélène Buchholzer, and today I'm going to talk to you about the work I've done for the past 6 months for my master thesis, which is the vulnerability assessment of the fishery-based livelihood to the implementation of an offshore wind farm using the case study of a pilot farm in France. So why did I do this vulnerability assessment? We can see that the past year, there is an increase of offshore wind farm projects around Europe and France due to new directive from the European Union who want to increase the production of sustainable energy. But we've seen that the implementation of wind farm can increase the pressure of fisheries activities because it reduces the fishing area. And this has an effect on fishery-based livelihood and also the well-being of the fishermen. So to better understand the interaction between the fishermen and the implementation of a wind farm, vulnerability assessment can has been done. So vulnerability is a really wide term. I'll talk about it for sociology or economy, but we choose the definition of the IPCC, who define vulnerability as the degree to which the component of a system are sensitive or unable to cope with the harmful effect of a stressor. So in other words, how sensitive they are and how what's the degree of sensitivity and how they're going to be able to cope with the effects on the implementation of a wind farm. So the objective of this assessment is to identify the pressure and key threats to professional fishing activities in the area, but also identify, thanks to once we identify the pressure and threats, we identify the group of fishermen that are the most vulnerable of the wind farm and why. And this is, it aims to build a vulnerability-based management to help fishermen to cope with the change. We use the method of the composite index to assess vulnerability, because vulnerability is not a term you can use for it's not something you can measure in the field. You can go to see a fisherman and ask them for vulnerability. Its vulnerability is composed with different points, different factors. So we use the 3 dimensions of the vulnerability, which is exposition, sensitivity, and adaptive capacity, that I will explain a bit later. And the framework, we define the framework. So the area that is going to be studied is the pilot farm between Groix and Belle-Iles, where 3 wind turbines are going to be built. And we define that there is about 52 fishermen in 2018 fishing in this area. And there is 3 different groups of fishing activities that are going to be compared to each other, depending on their activities and the characteristic of fishing activities, which is the size of vessel and the type of gear they use. So with small vessel using passive gears, small vessel using active gears, and large vessel using active gears. The selection of the structure of the composite index is based on literature. I'm sorry, I haven't charged my laptop. It's okay if I just move. My bad.
That's okay. You sort that out.
It would be... I guess it's okay. Can you still see me?
Yes.
Okay, better. So now the laptop is not going to crash, so I can continue. Sorry for this. So we need to conceptualize the composite index that will define vulnerability. So for this, we use 3 different types: dimension, domain, and indicators. So dimension and domain has been defined based on literature. The first, the dimensions are defined from the IPCC with exposition, sensitivity, and adaptive capacity. So we can see that exposition and sensitivity will drive to the impacts, and adaptive capacity will cope with the impacts to see, and this would define vulnerability. So, and then the domain are following the definition of the dimension. Following this, so this is the general structure, but then we wanted to focus on the specific area of the wind farm. So I get the chance to have interviews with fishermen to understand what were their key pressure and threats in this specific area. And thanks to the interviews, I highlight the indicators that was important for the fishermen specific in this area. These indicators, so now I had conceptualized the composite index. I need to apply it to define the vulnerability score. So each indicators are linked to data that are collected from the Système d'information halieutique d'Ifremer, who has most of the population. So it was really interesting to have a good overview of have all the information. And then because they have different unity and different scale, we use the min-max method to standardize the data, to compare them, and also integrate them using aggregation method and weighting method. Because the construction of a composite index is highly subjective, a sensitivity assessment of the composite index with the creation of several scenarios with different ways is done to see if the outputs are not too different using different scenarios. And we've seen that it's a pretty similar result. So the result is that fishermen in this area, the fishermen with small vessels using passive gears are the most vulnerable, with a score of 1.38, knowing that the vulnerability score goes from -1 to 2. And the least vulnerable are the fishermen having big boats between 12 and 24 meters and using active gears. We can see the graph with exposure, sensitivity, and adaptive capacity. These are the score we got. So the exposure is the same for all because it has been defined as the closure, an area closed time and in space, without distinction between the different activities. But we can see the sensitivity and adaptive capacity is different. We can see that in sensitivity, the type of gears has an effect on the sensitivity score, with depending of the type of gears. So if they are passive gears, be sensitive than the passive gears, and for the adaptive capacity is more the characteristic of the size of the boat that will make them more able to cope with the change than the small vessel. So we can explain this by explain this in different ways. So if we go one dimension by one dimension, the exposition is the same for all groups because it has been defined let's say that in this study, it has been defined that everything would be closed for all of them. So this is made by regulation change, who the exposure can change in between active fishermen. This area is the same, can be easily defined by regulation. The sensitivity here is higher for passive gears because of the defined space. In fact, if they are the area defined is close to the coast, and it's an area where the species where the species who are represented are targeted by passive gears. So this is why they are more sensitive. They have a higher dependency, economical dependency, for example. And the adaptive capacity here are higher for longer vessel, large vessel, because they have higher capital that make them more able to cope with the change. For example, they have a higher cultural capital, means that they are more. The large vessels are usually in the same harbor, so they have more opportunity to talk to each other and exchange with each other and help to cope with the change. Yeah. So if we look at the method I use and the approach, vulnerability assessment meets a specific objective, which is we want to know the vulnerability in the case of the implementation of a wind farm on fishing activities. However, the specificity of the assessment doesn't take into account all the pressure of the fishing activity. In fact, when I was talking with the fishermen, I've seen that the implementation of the wind farm was not really the main pressure they were scared of. The climate change, the increase, the change of the market was for them maybe a higher pressure than the implementation of the closure of area of the implementation of the wind farm. So we have to remember that this result follow only the pressure, answer only to the pressure of the implementation of the wind farm. So in conclusion, we can say that fishermen with small vessels and using passive gears are more vulnerable because of the location of the study close to the coast, and the fishing strategy because they use they target species in specific area and they are less able to cope in this study. For this population target. The vulnerability assessment is a tool to support decision making, to help them to help the manager to define a regulation in the area, for example. However, the transparency and the clarity of the composite index is really crucial to make sure the manager understands all the limits, the uncertainty of the result, because what I have done is only one specific result on one specific objective, and not everything has been taken into account, because if not, it would have been too complex. So I would like to thank my supervisor and Pascal Lefroc, as well as Christelle Legrand and Marjolaine Fraser, and also the Committee of Marine Fishery and Farming in the Morbihan, and the fishermen who participate to the project. Thank you for your attention.